OpenClaw v2026.4.1 just dropped, and this release is all about making OpenClaw rock solid in production. 25 commits from 30 contributors, headlined by a brand new tasks command that gives you a chat-native task board, bundled SearXNG for self-hosted web search, and a stack of reliability fixes targeting the exact pain points that bite you in long-running deployments. No restart loops, no leaked error messages, no stalled event loops. Let's break down everything that shipped. This is a smaller release than the massive v2026.3.31 we covered last time, but don't let the commit count fool you. Where 3.31 was about big architectural shifts like task flows and fail-close security, 4.1 is about finishing the job. The headline features are the /tasks command for in-chat task management, SearXNG as a bundled web search provider, Amazon Bedrock guardrails, Z.AI model integration with GLM-5.1 and GLM-5v Turbo, voice wake for talk mode on macOS, global default provider parameters, and per-job tool Allowlists for cron. But the real story is the reliability fixes. Gateway config reloader restart loops, task registry stalls under SQLite pressure, raw provider errors leaking into user-facing channels, all fixed. This is a production hardening release. The /tasks command is probably the most user-facing feature in this release. In version 2026.3.31, OpenClaw introduced the task flow control plane, that unified SQLite-backed ledger tracking every background run, subagent, and cron job. But to actually see what was happening, you had to leave the chat and run OpenClaw flows list in a separate terminal. Now you just type /tasks right in the conversation. It surfaces a task board showing every background task in your current session, what's running, what's completed, what's pending. Think of it like a Kanban board that lives inside your chat window. You don't context switch to a dashboard. You don't open another terminal tab. The status is right there alongside your conversation. Completed tasks fade out of the default view, so you're not scrolling through noise. And because it's session scoped, you only see tasks relevant to what you're actively working on. This pairs perfectly with the stale task cleanup also shipping in this release. Completed background tasks are now hidden from /status output, which means both /tasks and /status give you clean, actionable views instead of a wall of finished work. The provider ecosystem grows in 3 directions this release. First, SearXNG is now a bundled provider plugin for web search. SearXNG is a self-hosted meta search engine. It aggregates results from Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, and dozens of other engines without sending your queries to a third-party API. For privacy-conscious deployments and air-gapped environments, this is massive. You point OpenClaw at your SearXNG instance, and your agents get web search without any external API keys. Second, Amazon Bedrock guardrails. If you're running models through Bedrock, you can now apply content filtering and safety policies directly through OpenClaw's provider layer. Guardrails evaluate both the input and the output, catching policy violations before they reach users or downstream tools. Third, Z.AI joins the model roster with GLM-5.1 and GLM-5v Turbo. GLM-5.1 is a general-purpose model, and GLM-5v Turbo is the vision variant. These expand OpenClaw's model coverage into the Chinese AI ecosystem, alongside the existing QQ bot channel support from the last release. A quality-of-life feature that's been requested for a while. You can now set global default provider parameters in your agents.yml config under agents.defaults.params. Temperature, top P, max tokens, set them once, and every provider inherits those defaults unless explicitly overridden. Previously, you had to duplicate these settings across every provider configuration block. If you wanted temperature 0.7 across 4 providers, that was 4 separate config entries. Now it's 1 block. Per provider overrides still take precedence, so you can set a global temperature of 0.7 but run your coding model at 0.2 without conflict. This is especially useful for teams standardizing on specific generation parameters across their entire agent fleet. One config change, consistent behavior everywhere. This is where the release really shines. 3 critical reliability issues are fixed. First, raw provider failures no longer leak into external channels. If your LLM provider returns a 500 error or times out, users in Telegram, Discord, Slack, or any other channel used to see the raw error message, sometimes including stack traces, API keys and headers, or internal service names. Now they get a clean, friendly retry message. The raw error still goes to your logs where it belongs. Second, the gateway config reloader no longer causes restart loops. If you pushed a malformed config update, the gateway would detect the change, try to reload, fail, detect the change again, and loop until you manually intervened. Now it detects the failure, logs it, and keeps running with the last known good config. Third, task registry maintenance no longer stalls the gateway event loop under SQLite pressure. When you have hundreds of completed tasks accumulating in the registry, the cleanup queries were blocking the main event loop. Now, maintenance runs on a separate connection with bounded execution time. On top of those, model switching via /model is now queued behind busy runs so you don't corrupt an in-flight generation. And allow always permissions now persist as durable trust across sessions instead of resetting on restart. Cron jobs just got a critical security feature. You can now pass a -- tools flag to OpenClaw cron to restrict which tools a scheduled job is allowed to invoke. Previously, a cron job ran with the full toolset available to the agent. If you had a daily summary job that only needed web search ash, it still had access to exec, file operations, and every other tool in your configuration. That's an unnecessarily wide attack surface for a scheduled task. Now you can lock it down. OpenClaw cron -- tools, web search ash, exec, daily summary means that job can only call web search and exec. Any attempt to invoke another tool gets blocked. This follows the principle of least privilege that v2026.4.1 started enforcing with fail-closed plugin security. Combined with the existing cron scheduling, you now have fine-grained control over what your automated agents can actually do when they run unattended. Looking at the release on GitHub, you can see the focused scope of this drop compared to the 103 commit monster that was v2026.4.1. 25 commits, 30 contributors, 46 reactions. Released by Peter Steinberger as always. The changelog is organized cleanly. Features at the top, bug fixes in the middle, and platform-specific fixes at the bottom. The Telegram fixes alone cover topic-aware threading, safe send with 429 rate limit backoff, and MIME type preservation for file uploads. Discord gets shared idle timeout paths for attachment downloads. Thinking blocks and signatures are now preserved across Anthropic replay and context pruning, which matters for any deployment using extended thinking. And bundled plugin runtime dependency staging is restored for packed installs and Docker builds, a regression from 3.31 that was catching people on fresh deployments. The pattern here is clear. v2026.4.1 was the big architectural swing. Task flows, fail-close security, new channels, MCP remote servers. v2026.4.1 is the follow-through. The tasks command makes the task flow system actually usable from inside a conversation instead of requiring a separate terminal. The reliability fixes close the gaps that show up when you run OpenClaw as a long-lived production service. The provider additions with SearXNG, Bedrock guardrails, and Z.AI models expand the deployment surface without adding complexity. This is what a maturing project looks like. The exciting architectural features get the headlines, but the stability work is what makes teams confident enough to deploy. Every fix in this release reads like a real incident report. Restart loops from bad config, leaked errors in customer-facing channels, event loop stalls under database pressure. These are production problems, and OpenClaw is treating them as first-class priorities. For teams running OpenClaw in production, this is a straightforward upgrade. No breaking changes, just better defaults, better visibility, and fewer sharp edges. That's OpenClaw v2026.4. Release notes linked in the description. Subscribe for every OpenClaw release breakdown from Prism Labs.